James Hanley on the Iron Mindset podcast. Owner, businessman, trainer, coach, powerlifter, RevFit in Ashtown / Cabra / Finglas. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So on that conversation, we're talking about newer coaches coming in. You have been around fitness for 12 years. You've been involved?
Professionally, yes, 12 years.
What were some of the things when you entered the fitness industry, if you can remember those many moons ago? What do you notice now is the big difference between trends then and trends now?
Social media is the obvious one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more exposure to information. There's a lot more content. There's a lot more people talking about fitness. But like if you were to wind it back, 12 years ago, like RevFit is a small group personal training gym. We use racks, we use barbells, we use all the stuff now that's kind of common and expected. 12 years ago, there was maybe 3-4 gyms doing what we were doing. Like there was a couple of CrossFits. There was SDSC in Harold's Cross, which is like the OG. And then there was maybe one more, the Edge in Clontarf, I think. I'm probably forgetting some. Sorry to anyone who I've forgotten. But you'd have people traveling. People would come from Harold's Cross. They'd come across the M50 because the training and equipment just wasn't available anywhere else. Like small group personal training wasn't really a thing. Bumper plates weren't really a thing. D8 fitness was just getting going. Like kettlebells were this mad new invention 12, 15 years ago. So the change across that time period has been a much bigger shift from commercial gyms, treadmills, etc., to people actually getting coached now. And you can see it, like there's small group training gyms everywhere. Like the problem is, if you're not local, you don't matter. It doesn't matter how good the gym is, doesn't matter how good the coaches are, doesn't matter a damn what's involved if you pass 8 to 10 other places that are perfectly adequate. And that's all most people need.
You spoke to it there, and I remember this. My first ever gym was Ben Dunn in Jervis, which doesn't exist anymore, above the Leprechaun Museum. And I had 2 squat racks. When I left working in Flyfit Swords, I think when I left, the final count, and it's gone up since then, it was like 22 squat racks. So back in the day, it was essentially like a rarity to have a gym that was equipped enough to have these types of things. But seemingly every gym still had 24 treadmills. I suppose that probably speaks to people's first thought process when they start entering a gym, what needs to be done. Like I suppose most people gravitate towards cardio. Have you noticed even with that then, with your client base in RevFit, have what they're looking for from their training, has that changed over time?
Yeah, I think we've spoken previously over WhatsApp or Instagram about Moore's adoption curve. And the idea that like any market has certain maturity points. And when somebody, like a new market is created, let's say small group training 12, 15 years ago, whatever, there's a set of early adopters, there's a set of innovators. They come in because it's cool, it's new, it's hip, they want to be part of it. Then all of a sudden, other people start to kind of get a sniff of it. They know it's happening. They see a better way of doing things. They join. You start to get towards mass kind of general pop at that stage. And eventually you hit a stage where it's not always people who want to train or people who love going to the gym. It's people who feel like they need to in order to stay fit and healthy into the rest of their life. So the transition across time has been very much going from like lifting nerds or people who had this as like a hobby to people who feel like they just need to do it to stay healthy. And the way we've had to deliver the training then has obviously changed. We can't just put everyone under a barbell and be like, right, we are going to hammer volume for 6 weeks. We're going to take a week off. We're going to test. We've had to change the structure of training, change the focus, have more, like, I won't say bits that aren't necessary, but things that are designed to keep them engaged and keep attention. So a bit more conditioning work, more mobility work, stuff that during the normal course of training would probably be taken care of anyway, but people feel like they need that because the internet says so. So to a certain extent, like we need to give people what they want, but really the focus is on delivering what they truly need.
Yeah. And it's trying to marry those two things together over time.
Yeah.
It's I think that's kind of the beauty of the job. As much as we want to make it academic, fitness isn't that complex. Like it really isn't. We really want it to be something that it isn't. Like we really want it to be this, we're these hyper sophisticated professionals. It's getting people in an environment where they're comfortable to engage in an activity that will fundamentally lead them to better health outcomes down the road. And it sounds that's exactly what you guys are doing in RevFit. But let me ask then, what brought you into training? Like, tell me a bit more about your training background. Because like from the time I start getting into fitness, I remember your name. So
Right.
what brought you in?
I'm a dinosaur. So we'll go all the way back. So originally, I dislocated my shoulder, fell backwards onto it, popped out of socket, and it got progressively worse. There must have been 12 to 15 subluxations over a multi-year period. But along the way, got speaking to a surgeon. The surgeon was like, you should do some strength work, build some muscle in the area, hopefully stabilize it a bit that way. And I got really, really lucky. Like, so much of my story is just meeting the right people at the right time in the right places.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was probably 16, 17 years old, I met a guy in the Iron Gym. I don't know if you know it or not, but it's down beside Shelburne Park. There's a little sports and social club. It's down beside Tolka Park where Shelburne play. There's a little sports and social club there. And the gym was probably no bigger than the room we're in. There was dumbbells, there was a treadmill, there was a rower, like basically nothing. But the guy they had as the contractor who was kind of the PT on site, was a bodybuilder.
Mm-hmm.
A guy called Aidan Carroll. He runs Hard Target out in like Lusk, Balbriggan, I think. And he was the first ever person that taught me to train. And I just happened to meet the right guy who was really knowledgeable about training and really into it. And it kind of spiraled from there. So I was in Iron for a number of years. Then I joined a gym in town while I was in college. And then just through a random conversation on a bus one day with a guy, I'd mentioned I was interested in powerlifting. And this would have been 2005-ish, 2004, 2005, when like powerlifting was not a thing. And if you said powerlifting, people were like, oh, is that, a clean and jerk.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like, oh, one of my friend's dads powerlifts. And I was like, no way. So that's how I came to meet Ger Smith. His dad, Dave, was probably the top drug-free lifter in the country at the time. Got into Herx, and then it kind of just spiraled from there. So I trained all the way through like my 20s in Herx, which at the time was still the only place that had competition barbells.
Yep.
Then onto IDFPA competition, IPF competition. I was working as well. So I'd spent 4 years in college studying accounting, went into an audit training contract for 4 years, realized probably within the first year or two of that it wasn't the place I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whatever about being in an office, it was like the lack of flexibility in what I could do at the times I could do it, etc. A big factor was the fact that Herx downstairs closed at 7 o'clock. I think it still does because of noise prevention orders because it's in a residential area. So I'd never get across from Stephen's Green to Herx to train. And that frustrated me. And I just kept going. So towards the end of the training contract, I'd been having a chat with Barry Oglesby, who runs Cayuso Martial Arts.
Mm-hmm.
I trained BJJ with him for about 18 months or so. And I was chatting to him about, what I wanted to do and how I'd love to take a poke at this fitness stuff. Being in powerlifting for a while, I trained a couple of people to competition. I had a decent level of knowledge, and I'd love to just kind of see if I could make this work. And we're sitting on the mats after a training session one day, and he turns around and he goes, well, Dan, the guy who was doing the boot camp at the time, is leaving next week. I was like, no, I didn't. So he was like, well, you can take it over if you want. So at this point, I've nailed my colors to the wall. I've told the guy I really respect that I want to do this. He's offering it to me on a plate. I can't say no to this. I really want to say no to it because it's a really uncomfortable step, but I can't. So that was February 2012. Would have been like early in the week. Decided that Saturday or Sunday we're going to do a boot camp session. Basically contacted as many people as I could find that I knew, friends, family, begged them to come. Had a profile on boards.ie at the time, which I know you want to talk about.
Yes.
The real scandal. And through that, just kind of assembled a cohort of people that were coming regularly to the boot camp. Along the way, it got to the stage where I was paying more in rent to Barry than I would have if I had just opened my own place.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? There's somewhere here that I can take on at a pretty low risk. The startup cost is very low. If I make an absolute mess of this, if all goes to pot, I can probably dig myself out of this hole in a year as an accountant. So it'll be fine. So why not just give it a lash, see what happens? That was August 2012. And here we are, October 2023.
Yeah, and smashing it by the looks of things. Doing all right?
Doing okay. It's like anything else. I mean, you see the good parts. You don't see the sleepless nights. You don't see the struggles and background stress.
It's the joke they say you can work 9 to 5 for somebody else or 24/7 for yourself.
Yeah. It's like you're just a duck. Like you're calm on the surface, your legs are going 100 million miles an hour under the water.
But I'd imagine just based on even like the few interactions we've managed to have and the conversations we've managed to have, I think you're probably somebody who does better in an environment where there is constantly things to overcome for a greater purpose that you are working towards than if you were just getting paid by somebody else to go off and do a whatever job.
Yeah, and I think if nothing else, it's the challenge and kind of the flexibility is required. Like it's so cliche to say no 2 days are the same, but no 2 days are the same. Like we were talking about earlier, today has just been a massive day of doing things, and it's like 10:30 this morning, and I've got about 6 things done. Tomorrow won't be like that.
What time were you running at this morning?
I was up at 5:15. I was running by 20 to 6.
Amazing.
Because my 5-year-old Billy decided to wake up early.
Yeah, good man, Billy.
Yeah.
Getting dad out to train.
Coach Bill.
Let me ask though, obviously I do want to, so for those that don't know, there is a website called boards.ie with a very robust fitness forum that James used to post on frequently. I do want to get there, but I do want to ask a couple of questions. Just because of the unique perspective you have as somebody that is, now look, for whatever way you want to put it, you're a successful business owner, you employ other trainers, and you've been around fitness, which I would say in Ireland is still fairly formative. I would have said prior to maybe even the year 2000, most training in Ireland was field sports. I would actually even say that up to maybe like into the early mid 2000s.
Yeah, for sure.
We're primarily a field sport nation. Whereas like I was in Iceland recently for Western Euros, and it's a nation based on strength. Like anywhere we went, if they knew we were the powerlifters, it was a bigger deal. Whereas here it'd be like if you were a GAA head or a rugby head. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. But again, I think it's only really in the last maybe 15, 20 years we're actually starting to see a good adoption of resistance training. So for somebody who's been around this period of time and seen the groupthink evolve, what would have been some advice you would give to, you've mentioned you've tutored before for elite, what would advice be you would give to new trainers or people looking to open their own gyms and things like that?
Oh, I think the first one is it's going to take twice as long and cost twice as much as you expect it to. When it comes to opening somewhere, the environment now is so different to when I got started. Like, first gym was 450 square feet. It was like a storage room inside of a building. There was no windows. You could maybe get 3 squat racks in there. And I think it got off the ground for about 10 grand. You could not do that now. The standard of expectation is higher.
We talked about this actually with powerlifting comps.
Yeah, like the level of expectation has just risen, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's a part of a mature and evolving market. So I think anyone going and opening their own place now, and just before this interview, I was actually down with a coach who used to work for us who's just opened her own gym. I think anyone who's opened somewhere now, they have to go with more experience. They have to go with more knowledge. They have to go with more capital as well. You just need more money to do it, whether that's through investing, saving, or borrowing. And you also need to be better than just a trainer, because being a good trainer isn't enough now. Like, that's just assumed. 10 years ago, being a good coach and knowing how to coach a squat, bench, or deadlift, like, that was rare. That was a huge deal. Now, if you don't know how to do that to a really high level, you just no place even being in the industry.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I noticed that even when I began. So that's why I start with the moniker Iron Ian. So when I started in the gym I was in in there with about 18 other PTs. And none of them coached people through squat, bench, and deadlift. And that's essentially not all I did, but like I was a big barbell guy, you know, squat, bench, deadlift, press, row, chin ups. I was like, that's all you need. Like, that is not the hill I die on anymore. But at the time, I was really staunch in that market. And we think because I came in with a niche, I think a lot of trainers are like, well, I want to do fat loss, weight gain, strength gain, body composition, sports specific. And they're like, you know, jack of all trades, but I specialize in nothing. And I've only a surface level knowledge of all these things. I was really into barbells. Yeah. So I think because of that and because I had that niche, I stood out. And I think that's how I grew my client base when I started. So you've obviously seen that. I would tend to agree with this idea that I think the standard of coaches, at least the people that are staying in it for longer now, is increasing rapidly, because I think information available is better. I think more people are, for all the goods and bads that come with social media, at least for all the nonsense we see with the broccoli heads, we do also have like very good resources, 3DMJ, Barbell Medicine, Renaissance Periodization, who are a lot more visible now because of social media. I'd imagine that's something you've probably seen then as well.
Yeah, like the accessibility of knowledge now versus then is like, I don't think, unless you were around 10 years ago, you can't possibly understand how much things have developed. Like, you know, 10 years ago, there's no Eric Helms, there's no 3DMJ, there's no Trexler, there's no Greg Knuckles, there's no Stronger by Science. Like, even just the videos and podcast Jeff Nippard's putting out, some of that stuff, like the accessibility of Schoenfeld's research, like you couldn't get that 10 years ago. It didn't exist. And most of the stuff that did, like maybe 15 years ago, whatever, but most of the stuff that did exist was kind of towards field sports. It was towards power output, especially in like American sports, because that was just where most of the research was happening. And now it's just like, you can Google something, have a really, really good quality answer. Like somebody has made a video on something you want to learn about. And it's not just the theoretical implementation, it is the actual, like in the trenches thing where you've actually got research fellows and doctors who are coaches as well as being academics, which just didn't exist, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I was talking about this with Dan yesterday. You can ask ChatGPT. You can literally just log on to ChatGPT and say, "Here, well, like, what do I need to do in the gym? How do I understand how to do this thing?" Like, it's the access to information is so much higher. Like, I know, and this is where I'm going to sting you with the boards conversation. Okay. So part of what brought me to boards.ie and the fitness section was I wanted to learn more. So this is way back when I first started ever training in a gym. I had been in pro wrestling for years and never had a gym membership. Our local the wrestling school had a bit of equipment in it. Didn't know what I was doing, but did bits. So a friend of mine, Dean, who I'd had on the podcast, had gotten me into the gym. And I was like, right, I need to learn more. I need to pick up more knowledge and start to find out a bit more about this thing I'm actually starting to really, really enjoy. So I found myself on boards.ie. And who did I see in many of the threads but a user by the name of Hanley who managed to find himself at odds with many of the other users.
Only the ones who were wrong.
You did end up getting banned, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And I actually can't remember the exact reason I got banned. I think it was for self-promotion, but I think it was really just I'd annoyed enough people and told them they were wrong enough times that somebody was like, well, I'm going to get you.
Yeah. Do you know what I remember your username sticking out because a lot of what you said just made more sense to me. And I remember even Jay said this and Dean said this about you. He's like, he's a prick, but he's always right. And I think that was like, and the thing is, do you remember like any particular like back and forth you had with people about hills they were dying on or stances they were taking that were just so wrong?
So there's two answers to that question. Open the scars,
James.
One, I have a terrible memory for detail. My specific memory is atrocious. So a lot of how I remember things in situations and a lot of how I talk about things is kind of based off how it made me feel at the time. So like it's a huge flaw of mine and it's something that I have to take notes all of the time. Like I do not remember specific instances. If you remind me of them, I probably will, but like they don't always come back. So I'll come back to that. But that's actually where I started first met Jay as well, was on boards. I feel like it was a post about pull-ups or something. And I was like, no, that's nonsense. And there was a bit of a back and forth, but look, Jay being Jay, as much as a abrasive character as he can be at times, he is really knowledge hungry. He's very intelligent when it comes to training and he's always looking for information and answers. So we had a bit of a back and forth. We had a discussion. And then, for the first time probably ever announced in history, Iron Mindset exclusive, I was Jay's powerlifting coach.
That's
right.
I
don't know if that was ever discussed or not.
It was not.
He came into Refit with Cav and we went through some squat bench deadlift sessions. And I remember getting a picture of squat shoes off of Cav going, look what you've started. And here we are. Yeah. So I am the original host, I guess. When it comes to boards itself, though, my memory of most of the conversations was, here is what I've read online. Here is, like, these are people who weren't lifters. They weren't training. They might have been in a gym, but they never had attained a level of strength. And, like, you can't possibly teach somebody how to brace unless you've had decent weight on your back. And that's relative, obviously. 300 kilos, not that I've ever had on I have an equipment, but 300 kilos doesn't really feel that different to 200 kilos, but it feels a hell of a lot different to 60 kilos. And what you need to do to get there is entirely different. So boards was a lot of people who read about training, who liked the idea of training, but weren't actually doing anything in training. So there was a lot of stuff on there where I was like, when you actually get into the trenches, when you actually start doing the stuff in real life and don't just talk about it, it's wrong. And that's kind of the start and end of how most of the arguments happened.
It's also kind of full circle to what we were talking about previously with a lot of personal training courses, is that like a lot of the information doesn't really work in the real world. And you say yourself, as somebody who was tutoring a lot of newer PTs, it was like, here's what you have to know for the exams, but then there's all this other stuff that way. It's like the iceberg.
Yeah.
You need to get deep into that iceberg. And then it becomes that full circle thing. I had a discussion, there's a nice guy named Killian O'Connor, Dysfunctional Patterns on Instagram. I was on his podcast and we were talking about this cycle you go through as a trainer where it's like, this is easy, I can show everyone what to do. Then you're like, oh no, this is actually infinitely more complicated and I need to do this, this, and this. And you kind of come full circle. Well, actually, all that doesn't fucking matter. Just get people to do the stuff. But I do want to actually ask about that because Jay told me that after you had competed in April, your first return to powerlifting, which we'll get into your history shortly, and you had posted because you had liked my commentary, which thank you very much. And he was like, oh, I saw what James said. He goes, you know, James and me used to fucking hate each other. He goes, we used to argue online, and then it turned out he was fucking right. So I fucking I hated him for it. But then he actually started to coach me for powerlifting. Then I was like, no fucking way. And that was a big spark for me that I have to get James on the podcast. What are your early memories of Jay Farrand?
Oh God. Skinny boxer fitness model. I know there's still pics and abs of him during his what would you even call it? Like fitness model days?
I suppose so, yeah. It's not a look for him anyway.
No, he did not look well. No. But no, like, I think you've kind of nailed it. Like he was abrasive. Like we argue back and forth. I'm abrasive at times. But in doing that, you kind of come closer because you realize like most of the stuff you actually agree on. Like the stuff on the fringes you'll bicker about. But then when it kind of starts to compress to core principles, you're like, oh, okay, this guy actually agrees with me. And there's not a lot of people back then who were aware enough or savvy enough to do that. So I was like, well, he's my friend now.
Yeah.
And then Jay's ascension through the ranks of powerlifting coaches to powerlifting czar of Ireland happened, which has been amazing to see.
Yeah, and I suppose, like we've talked about, I think you've got that unique perspective of, and I'm not sure even many people listening will realize that you have been there since the beginning of, so everyone now thinks powerlifting lived and died at the same time as the Irish PF, but in reality, there's a whole history prior to 2015. So would you mind telling me some of those stories?
Right, okay. So I think this, like I wasn't there at the beginning. Powerlifting existed in Ireland before I did, amazingly, but like there was the thing is there was an Irish PF before the Irish PF. I don't think people even realize that there was an IPF affiliate in Ireland, like late 90s, early 2000s, for various reasons, lost its affiliation and whatnot. Powerlifting has always been a sport in Ireland. Like, you know, we've a rich history of stone lifting, of various strength feats. So I first came into powerlifting kind of 2005-ish with the IDFPA, where like there wasn't really qualifying or open meets. There was a national championships. There were 60 of us in a community hall down in Castleblaney. It was wild. And like you couldn't get squat shoes. You couldn't get singlets. Like it was basically lads in wrestling singlets, work boots, and GAA socks. Sharing belts, because trying to order belts was damn near impossible. Like you could maybe order off at Inzer and it might show up in 3 weeks or it might show up in 3 months. And maybe like 3 years later, you'd still be waiting. So the early days back then, it was just a load of dudes who like lifting weights, trying to get better at lifting weights. The way meets are run now is like, the evolution is impossibly difficult to explain. But it's been amazing to watch because like from the IDFPA days to now, the standard is like out of this world. Like back then you could be, I think as a 90 kilo junior, I squatted 165, bench 112 and pulled 190 in my first meet, won and qualified for the WDFPF World Championships. I did that as a teen actually and managed to total enough to qualify as a junior. Like 467 now at 90, I don't even, like I would imagine 467 is the qualifying total for some female classes at lower body weights.
Yeah, more or less.
Which is just nuts. And you might have had one or two ladies in the competition or maybe none at all. Whereas now, like it's probably a 50-50 split realistically. So it's one of those ones where I could probably ramble for ages, but like if there's specific questions, if there's anything kind of jumps out.
Well, I know you've spoken about before, and it's a really interesting point, especially for just the people that would be listening to this, to understand the accelerated growth powerlifting has seen in Ireland since even, let's say, 2017 to 2023. If you were around meets in 2005 to like 2010, the standards they were held to, as you mentioned, the environment you're in, the other people that were there, and how the sport has kind of exploded. Like, you're probably one of the few people who can really explain some of the differences on the ground. Because think about it, now lifters will complain about having to go to the toilet out in a Portaloo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like, you know, the warm-up room only having 3 racks, things like that. You know what I mean? Or having to warm, like, you know, I know many lifters have talked about, like, that have been around a bit longer. Like, we were warming up in like power racks, or not power, a squat cage with bumper plates to just maybe have steel plates on the platform.
Yeah. So we are the original cause of the Portaloo problem at RevFit. We used to rent them because, like, I'd been at a lot of powerlifting competitions at that stage, and the one thing that always stood out was the toilets got destroyed. They usually backed up, and people were just pooping on top of toilet paper, putting down some more, and you had this little poop tower built by the end of the day, and someone would have to clean it. So we got Portaloos, and it worked really well, because you didn't have to queue for toilets. You could get in, you could get out. When it came to the actual running of competitions, because the competitions were so small then, it mechanistically probably isn't that different to how it was mid-2015 area. But what has changed has been kind of from there towards, you know, the AB series, let's say. So 2005, 2015, the sport's fairly stagnant. You still had the kind of everyone squats in the morning, everyone benches in the afternoon, everyone deadlifts in the evening. You might do your first squat at, 8 a.m., you might do your last deadlift at 10 p.m. And that's just miserable. Like, the ups and downs of adrenaline, of fatigue, it's a horrible way to lift, and it just doesn't make sense from a running point of view either. So when the RSPF first started, I saw it as a great opportunity to get involved in powerlifting the way it should be. And again, it just came back to one of my relatively strong views about something. I was like, this is the way it should be done. Why aren't people doing it this way? Let's do it this way instead. So Sean and Jay kind of got the RSPF going. I was like, ooh, this is cool. Can I get involved? So I ended up being technical director. So I was on the original Irish Powerlifting Federation Committee. I was technical director, head referee for 2 or 3 years. Refereed at pretty much every competition, trained all of the referees up. And it just afforded us a chance to do stuff properly, like to have seats in the waiting area for lifters, to put up barriers so they could get from the warm-up area to the lifting platform without having to fight through crowds. Having racks that didn't have seats on top of them, having enough space, having a top table that could actually see what was going on. Like, all the stuff we take for granted now just didn't exist at the time. And every generation kind of brings in something new. And I'm sure at some point Jay will pass the torch on. Maybe I think it's actually happening with the USAPL now. It's the next evolution. Like, first evolution was 2005, kind of just a load of people putting on meets, doing the best they can. RSPF starts, level of professionalism goes up, meets are organized in a more lifter-friendly manner. And then, like, the later IPF and then AB series meets comes in. They're bigger productions, they're more entertaining, they're more exciting. The next evolution, by the looks of things with USAPL, is going to be taking it to specific venues, making it like a proper show rather than just trying to use a gym that isn't really set up for it. And running competitions in gyms just doesn't really work. We were lucky we had a big enough area to do it. We had 2 sections. We had a section where you could warm up and then another section where the meet could actually happen. But most gyms don't have that. And like, I know you're talking to Gar about City Gym, and like, the warm-up area for City Gym behind the curtains with the platform just beside it, it's a fantastic environment to lift in, but it's always very challenging to have a good competition there because the constraints of the building are just such that it's difficult. Whereas now with what they're doing with the USAPL, it's going to be insane. So I can't wait to see that. And I've already told Jay, if you need anything from me, so I'll probably end up refereeing at it. If you need anything, let me know, and I'm there to help.
Because I know the reason I want to know more about your views on these things is because whenever I say to Jay, like, who was there at the start of the Irish PF, he says Jay Farrand, Sean Ryan, Rob Burke, James Handley. So They're like the four. There's probably a couple of other people that are still around or were around in the formative years of it. So, like, you can really attest to how much the scene has evolved even since in the last 8 years.
Yeah.
You know, and even at that, so the Irish PF itself, I think, has probably evolved quite a bit since the last time you were lifting in it or hosting meets with them.
For sure. Yeah. I think I would have done my last Irish PF meet 2017, maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
Somewhere
Looked at your
around
open
there.
powerlifting.
Did you see the competition? I beat Noel by 1 Wilkes point.
I did.
That's the last time I ever got close to him. I won the Abs Club Championship one year. Jay was hosting a competition. It was supposed to be like the Leinster Open or the Abs Open. And he decided he was going to call it the Abs Club Championship. And he was just so certain an abs lifter would win it. And I ended up pipping Noel by a single Wilkes point on the last deadlift.
Yeah.
And now he probably has about 100 points on me, but whatever. So I actually think this is probably time for me to grind my axe. So the whole evolution of powerlifting, I've had a massive problem with what's happened in the sport over the last 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So winding all the way back to mid-2000s, powerlifting scene was very small.
Mm-hmm.
There was 3 main federations. There was the IDFPA, the IPO, and the GPC, all of which still exist in some shape or form at the moment. The IDFPA were holding a competition in 2009. It was European Championships of some description. Could have been single lift, could have been something else. But like, no one had any gear. Like, no one had racks, no one had bars. There's a couple of them splattered across the country. Like, there's more. We've 3 racks in RevFit and 3 comp sets. That was about as much as existed in the country beforehand. Mm-hmm. So everyone came together. All the federations came in. The IPO, GPC, IDFPA. And these guys brought equipment. They brought spotters. They brought loaders. They essentially ran the competition.
Yeah.
For the IDFPA. So for those who don't know, IDFPA, Irish Drug-Free Powerlifting Association, tested, very staunch anti-steroid. GPC, IPO, untested. Whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
And at that competition where the powerlifting community of Ireland came together to run it, the IDFPA had an AGM. And at that AGM, they decided, you know what, if you're a member of any other federation, you can't also be a member of our federation. So these guys had essentially taken advantage of the goodwill of these other federations in this community and then said, well, now you can't sit with us. And at that point, I was like, well, fuck you guys. Mm-hmm. I don't know how, I don't know when, but at some point I'm going to remember this and make sure I do something to correct it. And it was at that point I was transported back when I saw the IPF get going. And I can't even remember how. I think I was probably talking to Jay about something. I didn't know Sean. I didn't know any of the other lads up north involved at that time. And Jay was talking about it. And I was like, this was after then Jay got run out of the IDFPA as well. Like, the historic IDFPA is basically just been a lot of people trying to protect their own little kingdom.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that Jay has done that no one else has done in powerlifting is made it more about the lifters than themselves. Mm-hmm. So when I saw this opportunity to kind of right the wrongs after one, that debacle in 2009, and then having seen what happened with abs and how they got too big, essentially, I was like, fuck this. I'm going to do whatever I can to just take this away from them. Mm-hmm. So got the opportunity to get involved with the Irish PF at committee level, had a lot of powerlifting experience and knowledge at that stage, and we just had a clean slate. We could do things the way we wanted to do it. We could do it properly. Myself, Jay, we were lifters first. We were coaches first. Sean, same. Rob, I mean, goes without saying, super intelligent guy, really detail-orientated, kind of corralled the kids and made it a bit more professional. And it just kind of, it just took off from there. Like, so simple things like having competition gear at competitions, having setups that allowed spectators to view, had somewhere for the lifters to get ready, warm-up areas with sufficient equipment, but then also just, kit checks that ran on time, referees that knew what they were doing, and just running things to specific timetables rather than, like, you could have flight times previously and you might end up running 2 hours over. Mm-hmm. And that just doesn't happen anymore. If anything, it happens, like, the flights finish early because the spotting and loading is so good. So it's just been an increase in efficiency, in professionalism, and in quality. And I don't think you'll fully see that or understand it unless you'd seen what it had been like before.
Mm-hmm. And I will actually say, for the powerlifters that came in after that, thank you very much for all your hard work, for you and everybody then. No, like, honestly, because the reality is that the quality of the meats that we have presented and are going to be able to present into next year and the years after are built on the backs of the people that were there in those formative years. And it might not, like, again, every small effort might not seem like a big deal in isolation, but even that, the idea that there are like probably over 100 combo racks in the country now that didn't exist. I own 2 combo racks. You know what I mean? Like, the fact that Ireland has become a place that people even send combo racks is built off the backs of people like yourself, Rob, Jay, Sean, and all the guys and girls that we're not naming that were involved and helped to keep the process running. And it is phenomenal to see that they're in that period of time. And I think this is the same in everything. It's like the crabs in the bucket. You know, there's people that want to keep it at the level it's at because that's something they can kind of rule over. Whereas there have to be those forward thinkers, the people that are doing it for the betterment of the sport, even if it comes at the detriment of maybe themselves or their gyms and their toilets or whatever it might be with the Tower of Poo. But like, and I really think it can't be overstated how people should actually probably consider those things and not lose the forest for the trees. One of my biggest gripes I have with that, even in the time I've been a powerlifter now about 5 years, the thing that fucking annoys me the most is when people give out about the abs toilets. It's like, here is a gym where they have 6 racks for you to warm up in, a dedicated warm-up area, a massive platform with a built stage. The meets are presented excellently. You mentioned Gar as well with City Gym. The work they can do with that small venue. The guys down in Phenom in Cork, the amazing job they do with the small space they have. And people can complain about toilets. It's like, I really don't think you've realised how far it has come. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying how far it's come means that the modern problems don't still need to be solved, which, as you mentioned, the guys in USAPL Ireland are working to solve. But still, it's built off the backs of hard work of other people that essentially did it for it's a thankless role. And I'm sure you probably realise that yourself, because I know you took a step away from powerlifting then for a couple of years. But like, I know there was massive developments in your life, but was any other reasons for it, or was it all just a matter of time?
It was pretty much all timing. Like, I think one thing that I really take away from this is, I don't care if people know that I was involved in the RHPF early days. I don't care if they remember what I did. I'm really just grateful that the sport is where it is now. And having done an Ab Series event in April of this year, I was really so blown away by just how good it was, how kind everyone was at it, like people I hadn't seen for years, just stopping to talk to me. And also just how special it was being back in the platform, because that time during the setup of the RHPF, like, realistically, were probably some of the most enjoyable years of my life. It was just going to competitions, it was hanging out in gyms, it was spending weekends and weeks with people who had very similar interests, very similar personality types. Like, it was just the best crack. I'm kind of sad. I know I'll probably never have that again because I just have too much responsibility, and that's something I'm quite sad about, but I'm also really grateful that I got to do it. So when it comes to powerlifting now and kind of where it goes from here, I'm just happy to have had kind of a part to play. With regards to the reasons for stepping back, I mean, I had kids. Like, the last big prep I did was, I was getting ready for Western Euros in 2017. I was kind of hanging on by a thread with a few injuries. Prep was going so well. I think I was like 5 or 6 weeks out. I'd done like a 230 squat triple, bench 152 for 2, pulled 265 at about a 7. Like, everything was going really, really well. And then I just had this massive general non-specific meltdown of my body. QL, general area, SI joint, everything just went to shit. I think, 5 years of training just caught up on me at that point. And that would have been, kind of September time, 2017. We got married February 2018. And then, like, life just happened. So, like, went on honeymoon for 4 weeks, got pregnant, had a miscarriage, got pregnant again, had Billy. Parenthood happened, running a business happened, got pregnant, had another miscarriage, COVID, got pregnant, had Daisy, came out of COVID, and then, like, spent basically a year post-COVID just trying to rebuild the business. And it's only now that both kids are in creche, life has settled down a bit, I actually have some space and time to train properly again. I've only really managed to string together proper training in probably the last 12 months or so.
Well, just even on that timeline, like massive respect to you and your partner for having the resilience to go through. That's fairly harrowing times. Like that's a lot of hardship to face. So, kudos to you and her, because that's serious stuff to come through.
Yeah.
And you do have 2 lovely little kids now.
Yeah. And like even with that, like there was other things like, I mean, when Billy first, like Billy was 11.5 pounds. Like he was a fucking monster. Like he was huge. And how Sarah managed, like on days he was 10.9 or something. So how Sarah managed to give birth to them, I still don't understand. But she came through and did a great job. Then he was in neonatal intensive care for a couple of days. Then 8 days in, he stopped breathing and turned blue, which was terrifying. And all of that stuff kind of happened in a really short time period, which then had a massive knock-on effect for a number of years. Because like once that happened as parents, like kid in intensive care, kid stopped breathing, you're like, what else is going to go wrong? And you're constantly on edge.
You're in high alert the whole time.
Yeah, and there's only so much you can give to everything else. Like you're trying to keep your family life together, you're trying to keep business together, and everything else is just like on the backseat at that stage. So to get through all that, we just kind of had to hunker down, keep the head down, plow on, get through it all, and just trusted at some point you'd emerge, which is kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, and like, that I think it's a testament to like the strength of your relationship then as well, and what you've managed to build together. Because as I said, like you're running a successful business. I think it's I think it's a big deal. You employ other trainers, like in a fair way. Like I don't think people understand that in this business. There's always these kind of like, we're not going to disclose how much money you will make because we are trying to not pay you anything. Whereas like you are like a good friend of mine, Martin, works for you if I'm not mistaken still. And like that seems to be the most like secure and settled he's been since he's entered the fitness industry. So
yeah, the way personal training, etc., is marketed as a career is hilarious. So unsurprisingly, I have some very strong thoughts on this. Number one, when it comes to training, you'll see a lot of places employing, bunny ears, sorry, I slapped the mic there. You'll see a lot of people employing personal trainers. Really the employment is you work in the gym and you get to do some personal training for free outside of it. A lot of gyms do that. That's not employment. You're not getting a salary. The way we operate is we have currently 4 full-time paid salary coaches, 1 part-timer and myself. So actual, like at the end of each month, they get a full salary, they work, it's secure employment. They're not responsible for bringing in clients. Their job is to train the clients, make sure the clients are happy, and plow on from there, provide value in whatever other way they can. And that's something that is a rarity now. It was non-existent 5 years ago. So to have that is cool. The way I think it needs to happen long-term, because, people burn in and out of the industry all the time. And like anything else, like there's certain levels of knowledge that people attain. And if you're not constantly moving to the next level, their career will stall out. So in order for fitness to be a viable long-term career for people, so like into the 30s, into their 40s and beyond, I think there needs to be like a law or accounting model. So, I'm sure some people will be familiar with it. I'm not sure who will or won't. So in general, when it comes to something like law or accounting, you start as a graduate, you're fresh out of college, you go into a graduate training program. You may graduate to assistant manager, to senior manager, to director, and to eventually partner. Partner level is where like you get a corner office and the big bucks are made. You play golf all day, you get paid. But you also form responsibility. And at that point, your primary role is generation of business. It's not so much the technical aspects anymore. Anyone who gets to that level has a good technical knowledge, but they're probably better at bringing in new clients and generating revenue for the company. So over time, there has to be that kind of progression for people. So one of our coaches, Luke, he started as an intern. He was a skinny kid. Has been, as client and coach, probably close on 10 years now, but has gone from just being an intern to being a client to an intern, competing at a really good level in powerlifting. He was competition secretary of IPF for a while, gym manager now, and will be a partner in the next gym we open, which could be a month, could be 6 months. It's in process, but these things never happen quickly. So he's done that. Then the idea is like, if you want people to continue and stay in the job long term, you have to provide a pathway, which most places don't. It's like, well, you're just going to train people and that's it. And I think people running businesses don't think about that. They don't think about what's going to happen next. Then they complain about coaches leaving. They complain about staff turnover. And they're pricks to work for. They don't understand the basics of running a business or motivating people or leadership. And then they wonder why the world's collapsing around them. Like, they have guys working split shifts 4 days a week. It's fucking nuts.
Did you ever work in like a commercial gym? You dodged that bullet.
I dodged that bullet. I interviewed for a place once, a small group training place as well. And I almost took the job, but just something didn't feel right about it. I was proven correct as a result afterwards. But I had no interest in going to a commercial gym because I didn't want to be a PT walking around the floor, talking to people, being like, hey, you don't know me. Can you give me money, please? Like, it just never... I always cared about lifting and coaching first. That was always, like, even back in the boards days, like the amount of people I helped out through there directly and indirectly, coaching people to competition. And look, you know yourself, every single training session is basically also a coaching session. You're always looking for small things that can be improved. And I had so many hours of that under my belt by the time I actually got paid to do it that it was just a very natural evolution. But even then, like, it's not just about coaching. Like, I know you want to talk about the business side of things, and it's one of those ones where we could probably fill up another 2 hours talking about the business side of things, which I'm more than happy to do. But you know, where do you want to go with it, I guess?
Well, so I think that's probably a really interesting talking point, though, because I think it's the side of the like right now we're just, as we're recording, we're right at the end of October, tax return season for all of us. And the number of coaches I know that come in that, like, this is like this thing hanging over them that they're like, I don't even know what to do. You know, I think it's like, it speaks to how poorly equipped most of these people are to enter this space and actually exist in it long term, you know? Like, we're speaking practically, if you were talking to new coaches now or people entering the business, and there is obviously the element of working with people and being a good coach and where you should put what eggs you should put in that basket. But there's also the whole of you're essentially now either, whether you're a sole trader or you're working you have a company, you're working for yourself. Like, what are some practical things people need to know from a business standpoint?
Right. So I think the most fundamental part is that regardless of the structure, whether you're a sole trader, whether you're a personal trainer, whether you're running your own small group facility, whether you are running a boot camp in the park, or whether you are a powerlifting coach online, the same principles apply. Like, in order to grow the business, you need to do 3 things. You need to get leads, make sales, and deliver your service. So you need to find people that are interested in whatever you're offering. You then have to have some way to get them to give you money. And then once they've given you money, you need to be able to actually do the thing you said you were going to do. And at each point along the way, problems happen. So, like, have you ever heard the leaky bucket analogy?
Okay, walk me through.
Okay, so let's just use a gym. Your gym is a bucket. So your bucket holds 100 people. And if you want to fill your bucket, you need to have people coming in. You need to have leads who then turn into clients. That can be through, you know, Instagram, through people knowing you because of your podcast. It could be because you're getting referrals from existing clients. Maybe you're just talking to people in the street, or you're marketing on Facebook, Instagram, Google, whatever, and there's organic search. All of that stuff's coming into the bucket. But the bucket isn't watertight. The bucket always has a leak at the bottom because people leave. That's just the nature of the game. Some people leave because they've moved. Some people leave because they're not getting progress. They get injured or whatever. There's always a hole or two in the bucket. And the problem with it is, the more full the bucket gets, the bigger the hole gets. The more things slip. So the problems you didn't even realize are there start to become more apparent. So at some point, you're pouring in all these people. Maybe you're putting in 10 new people a month, but 10 people are leaving on the back end. And you're just stuck at this point where you have 100 members or 100 clients or whatever, and you just can't get past it. And no matter what you do, you end up at that point. And you get frustrated. And you get frustrated because you don't know what to do. And in the uncertainty, you start to get more and more annoyed. And that's when you start to panic. So the way to think about the leaky bucket is that it doesn't matter how much is going in the top if the exact same amount is being flowed at the bottom. So what do you fix first? Do you try and get more sales, or do you try and fix the problem? Intuitively, you want to fix the problem because it doesn't matter how many sales you make, you never actually grow. The problem for most people is they're just not doing a good job. So sessions start late. The product, the coaching, or the facility isn't good. It's dirty, stuff's broken. Coaches don't show up for sessions. All of these things that seem like the most basic of things that people miss. So you're late for a couple of sessions. Doesn't seem like a big deal at the time, but people notice. And it just slowly but surely chips away at the trust. And when a better offer comes along, they leave for a different gym. So we send all of our new members within the first couple of weeks training with us a very short survey. And the survey is, I feel like it's needlessly simple. But the reason why we send it is because I know if this stuff isn't done, it's a bigger issue. So like it's leading and lagging indicators, right? So like lag indicator, people are leaving. But the lead indicator is, what are the things we need to watch out for to make sure that they don't leave? And that's like the simple questions are, the trainers know your name? Do the coaching team know your name and greet you by name? Do the sessions start and finish on time? Do you feel like a valued member? Do you see Revit as being a good long-term home for you? And if the sessions aren't starting and finishing on time, and if the coaches don't know their names, like we only train like about 200, 220 people, which is a huge number of people, obviously, for a small gym. But if within that, the sessions aren't starting on time, and if the coaches don't know you personally, that's a really big issue. Because it's not so big that shouldn't happen. And then if you don't feel like a valued member, or you don't feel like it's a good place for you, why? Like, are we not doing what we said we would? Is something else at play? Like, what can we find out now by asking this question that we can solve, rather than in 8 weeks' time you turn around and say, well, you did this and this was shit and that was shit. Like, that's too late to do anything. So when it comes to running the business side of things, and I feel like I could just ramble for hours on this, you need to have people coming in, you need to be onboarding them well and efficiently. You then need to deliver a good service, and then just keep all of that in place as you grow, because the bigger you get, the more problems become. And if you double in size, you double your problems. And at that point, once the problems have doubled, that's when stuff starts to get out of hand really, really quickly.
What type of process do you have when new coaches come on? Because it sounds like I would say you probably hold yourself, your facility, and your coaches to a very excellent standard. What's that process look like?
So we have a lot of training videos, obviously, kind of walking people through the system. The most important part, though, I think, is the initial screen, like the initial interview process, because it doesn't matter how technically savvy somebody is. If they can't speak to somebody, if they can't have a conversation, if they can't relate to somebody, like, there's no place for them. Because ultimately, like, fitness now is just hospitality.
Yeah.
Like, it is no different to, I'm probably going to get some flack for this. It's no different to a bar. It's no different to a restaurant. It's no different to a hotel. You expect really good service. You expect a warm and welcoming environment, and everything else that kind of happens around that is just part of the service. So if somebody on the interview initially comes across really well, if they seem friendly, the technical skills aren't as important. So we've recently hired a new part-time coach, still in college. She didn't have a huge amount of experience coming in. A good athlete, training herself, but not much coaching experience. But from the interview, from how she conducted herself in the run-up to the interview, the quality of her CV, and then just speaking to her, we're like, this is someone we want. And the process to get her up to speed is really simple. Like, here's some training videos, here's how we do stuff, here's why we do it, here's the background of the business, as in, like, here's how somebody comes on, here's their experience getting started, here's the promises they get made. Because all that stuff's really important, because if something, like, let's say if the stuff on the floor being delivered is entirely different to what they've been promised on the way in, that disconnection creates problems, it creates internal struggles, and then you lose members as a result. So these are all the things that we said we do. Now, here's how it works. And our coaching process is really simple. During every session, you greet someone by name and welcome them. You seem happy to see them. 2 things that went well, 2 things that they could do better. Say goodbye, give them a wave, give them a fist bump. Like, that might seem overly structured, but it just serves as a checkpoint during sessions to make sure people are getting personal attention. And if everybody during a session, and like we train groups of 4 to 8 people, so not a huge number by any means. In a 45 to 60 minute session, it's very easy to have multiple touch points with somebody so that they feel valued, so that they're learning, so that they're making improvements, their good work's being acknowledged, and we're just doing what we said we would do. So they shadow sessions, they shadow basically a week. They do coach a warm-up, or they'll be like the demo dummy for a warm-up. Then they'll coach warm-ups. Then they might coach the first block. Then they might coach the second block. Eventually, within a couple of sessions, they're coaching an entire day with an experienced coach shadowing them. they always start with the sweat program initially. So it's dumbbell, kettlebell, bodyweight strength work, some interval cardio. The technical coaching requirements there aren't as high. And then they move on to our strength program, which is barbell based. And all along the way with that, we're just looking for the simplest things they're not doing. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to training, like there's a couple of really simple principles that I'm sure everyone could agree on. Like when you're squatting, the bar needs to stay over your foot. Mm-hmm. If you're too upright, you're going to fall backwards. If you're too far forward, it turns into a good morning. So everything is focused around doing that. When you're benching, shoulders down, barbell starts roughly over your eyes, you take it out over your sternum, bang, bench press done. And that seems overly simple, but a lot of people aren't coaching that. They're not setting up that way. Mm-hmm. Deadlifts, really, at the end of the day, like when you've grabbed onto the bar, your knee should be roughly against your forearm. I don't know if you've seen this kind of setup before where, like if you stand over the bar, if you grab onto it, if your knees are forward of like your forearm line, your hips are going to probably pop. If they're behind your forearm line, your lower back's probably going to get torched. So like the sweet spot for most is knee against bicep, knee against forearm, depending on limb length. Brilliant. It's the best coaching cue I've ever heard. Yeah. And then the front of their foot should stay connected. If someone's doing RDLs, if someone's doing good mornings and we see their toes lift, we know that they're probably not hinging as efficiently as they could. They're just pushing their ass backwards. And it's not the same thing. And as soon as you get somebody back onto their, not on their toes, but as soon as you get them back to midfoot, they're like, oh, that's my hamstrings. You're like, yes, exactly. And those simple principles apply across the board. Like look at split squats, look at split lunges. You don't want to be too upright doing them because you'll be off balance. Your back leg will do a lot of work. You want to have your torso with a slight incline forward so that the bar again or the weight is over the front of your foot. If you're doing bent over rows, if you're doing any kind of hinge-based movement, you need to have the front of your foot connected to the floor because if you don't, you're going to be off balance and your lower back's going to get torched. So it's trying to communicate those really fundamental principles that have a disproportionately strong effect on everything else. Mm-hmm. And once somebody starts to get that, they can apply it much more across the board to everything else. Mm-hmm. And that's where the real kind of art of coaching, I think, starts to come in.
Mm-hmm. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, we kind of realize that the stuff on the gym floor, like the practicalities, that can be taught, but really the interpersonal element is what makes or breaks a coach. Yeah. And I think today there's pros and cons to social media, but I think the idea of now everyone comes out of their 8-week PT course and wants to be an online coach.
Yeah.
And I've had these conversations, like I worked in Flyfa for 6 years and I'm like, fucker, you don't even know how to solve it with the person standing in front of you. How are you going to do it from a badly shot video on their brick of a phone? Like it's mind boggling what people think coaching is. Like, but I can write this really good program. No one gives a fuck if they don't know how to read it. Can you explain it, you know? And that's it. You've probably seen this happen a very, very long period over time. Yeah. But I used to always have these conversations. So by the time I finished in Flyfoot, I was assistant manager in the swords branch. And new trainers will come in and naturally the first thing they want to do is start picking up clients. And it's like they're worried about their business card or their apparel or like how nicely they design their class whiteboard. And I'm like, just go and fucking talk to people. Like go and meet people. So like find out what it is that they want from their experience in the gym and be willing to give them that. Be the person that say, well, come to me and we can solve this together. And I always say, like, I'm a big believer in this. When you're new, you've limited resources, but your most abundant resource is time. So be willing to give it to people. The number of trainers we had, they'd be in on a 4-hour shift and they'd come in, they'd teach their classes, try sit in the office or they'd hide in a toilet on their phone. They don't want to be out talking to people. And then the moment their shift is done, they fucking leave. I'm like, go onto the gym floor and just say hello to the people you know from the classes even. Because that was their vehicle to pick people up, you know? And the number of people that are resistant to it, you see yourself, it's a revolving door. People come in, this is tough, out I go.
Yeah, and look, you see it a lot with people who are getting started, a lot with people who are asking for advice, and a lot with newer people in the industry. And look, I've fallen prey to it myself. You control the stuff that's easy to control. Mm-hmm. It's easy to design a business card. It's easy to make your whiteboard look pretty. Like there's no fear of rejection. There's no vulnerability in that situation. You've done all this work in inverted commas to build your brand. Mm-hmm. So you just need to do more of that, and then you'll get clients. Because you've never put yourself in a position where someone's going to say no to you, or the uncomfortable situation of having a conversation with somebody you don't know, or stumbling over your words, or just making a fool of yourself in front of somebody. So that's the stuff people actually need to do. Mm-hmm. And that shortens the feedback loop considerably because you're not waiting and hoping for clients anymore at that point. You're actively out looking for them. Mm. And that means there's a lot of rejection. Like you're going to get shot down a lot. And this is something that my wife Sarah runs her own business as well, the Better Life Project. It's like life and executive coaching, confidence training for women, and quite a bit of corporate work. The thing she's probably seen over the last year or two now is that when you're making direct approaches and really trying to get in touch with people who've expressed an interest in the service, some will say yes and some will say no. And you just can't take the no's too personally. Like there's a whole load of reasons why someone might say no to starting with you in a gym or for whatever reason. That could be because the offer just wasn't good enough. You came across the wrong way. You didn't assess their needs adequately, or they just might not have the money for it. So the thing though is by the end of that conversation, if they're going to be a client or not, you're not hoping and wishing anymore. But that also means you're getting rejected quite frequently. And it's only probably in the last number of years I've really understood this myself as well and kind of come to terms with it, that they're not saying no to you as a person. They're saying no to the offer, to the stuff you're asking them to do. Because ultimately, like from a fitness side of things, in order to get something new, to change their body, to change their fitness, they're going to have to start doing things they're not doing, and they're going to have to give up things they're already doing. And when someone's been doing stuff their entire life, asking them, the perception is that you're going to ask them to change everything. And we know that's not the case. We know we do it gradually. But coming in, their idea is like, oh my God, this guy's going to tell me all the stuff I do is bad. He's going to criticize my diet. He's going to tell me I need to not go out with my mates anymore. I'm going to be in the gym in the morning and in the evening. This is going to suck. And you've got to jump that hurdle. And you've got to learn how to communicate with people in ways that basically eliminates these fears before they even get to the point of getting started. And if you can do that, you'll be very successful. But you can't do that on a business card. And a fucking whiteboard with 6 different colors doesn't do that either. So people spend a lot of time and focus and attention on the wrong things. And then they wonder why they're not growing. And they're not growing because they're just doing the wrong stuff. Maybe they've never been told what the right stuff is. And look, maybe we can talk about that a bit more. They've never been told what the right stuff is, or they're not doing consistently, or they're just shit scared of getting a no. And that's just something you build tolerance to over time, you know?
I think as well with fitness, people that are drawn to fit, like I'd imagine it's probably a similar. I know your entry into it with the shoulder is a bit different, but like if you've had any kind of an interest either in sport or fitness at some stage in your life, you are probably in a minority. Like the vast majority of people probably played a little bit of football or something in school and then fell out of it in their adult lives. So when you have people coming to a gym, if they even have gotten to that point yet, that's like this massive like series of events that have led them to this point that they're like, I need to take action now. And I think sometimes fitness professionals, and I will hold my hand up and say I was probably guilty of this when I started as well, we can be a little tone deaf to the needs and concerns of those people in that moment. Because like I don't get nervous when I go to the gym. And I've talked to other coaches and they're like, oh, I'd still get new gym anxiety because I don't know where anything is. I never fucking experienced that. Dead on the inside, you know. But years in powerlifting will do that to you, you know. Seeing yourself just regress. But I really try to empathize with the position that this person is in and what their experience might be like. So even with the language I use, with the message I'm trying to give them, if there is something that is so important that I need to say it, I'll probably select the words more carefully based on who the person is and where they are. And then I'll also put everything through the filter is, do I need to say this to them now or does it not matter? Like, I think, for example, like say the first time somebody squats a bar, they're going to be a little bit all over the place, and that's just because their skill acquisition they haven't started to learn yet. It's like a little kid riding a bike; they're going to fall off a few times, they'll be fine, you know. So it's that like, do I need to have them? They're already self-conscious. They're already thinking, I look like a fool, I feel like a fool. Everybody's looking at me. I want to be anywhere else but here. I want to crawl. I want to curl up in myself and die. You know, some people genuinely have this level of anxiety, and now this fucker who like embodies everything about fitness is standing over me. You know, so if they rack the bar and I go, good job. Yeah, it's like,
wait, what?
That's it. You know, like a lady I train, lovely girl. She's been coaching with me now a little while, probably let's say the last 6 months. And a friend of hers started with another coach out in Malahide, right? Now, I don't know who the coach is, right? I probably narrowed it down too much. People are probably going to know who this person is.
Yes.
But I've no idea who it is. I didn't even get their name. But she was like, they've been together like for the first 3 months or so they were coaching. They just did technique. They didn't do anything else. They just did technique. But I don't think we really did that. Why didn't we do that? And I was like, oh no, we did. I just didn't have to, you know, turn your toes out 45 degrees and push your big toe down hyper hard and all. Because like over time we'll just be like, you know, put more weight in your toe.
Yeah.
That's good. And let like problem solve as we go and let them actually accrue some workload in there. And I think trainers can be either, I think sometimes can, and I don't get me wrong, I can see you want to chime in here, but I'm on a bit of, I'm risen here, you know. It's I think sometimes trainers can use their clients, their lifters, as an extension of their own egos. And if they see the lifter doing something wrong, it's like, you're now a negative reflection of me. Oh, you didn't stick to your diet plan. That's a negative reflection of me. It's like you're dealing with a person, not an animal. You know what I mean? Like let's pull back here and see what is your actual motivation for working with this person. James, please chime in.
Have we had this conversation already?
I don't think so.
Okay, because this is one of the biggest issues I have in fitness, and it's basically everything you just said. We've had so many clients over the last year or so come in saying that, like, are you going to be really militaristic with my food? Like, am we going to be doing food journal reviews every day? I don't want to do that. You know, what happens if I miss a session? I'm like, you miss a session? Fuck, you miss a session. Life happens. And then they tell me stories of being in other gyms where, like, every day was like an interrogation. Like, they'd come in to train and the coach would be like, so what'd you eat yesterday? Why'd you do that? Did you get your 8 hours of sleep? Why not? Is this not important to you? And they're like, motherfucker, like, I have a life, I have a family, I have kids, I have shit going on here. And you're criticizing me. Like, you're supposed to be helping me. And the coach does it well-intentioned because they want the client to get results. But the results they want the client to get is what they want. They want the client leaner, they want the client stronger, they want some markers that they can point to that they've done their job. When in reality, if the client is showing up and enjoying themselves, you're doing your job. The only thing that matters in the long term is consistency. Like, if you do it wrong long enough, you're probably still going to be okay. If you do it perfectly for 6 weeks, yeah, you might get a great before and after, a great transformation, but you're probably going to regain all of that weight off the back end. So why would you create an environment where it's adversarial? It's got to be collaborative. It's got to be, like you said, you're kind of, the way, one of the best ways I've heard said is, like, you're not a sage on stage, you're a guide in the side. Like, you're kind of just walking the path with them. You're not shouting down at them. And that has to be the culture. You know, if it's a sporting environment, if it's something like a powerlifting club, yeah, maybe you can be a bit sterner with somebody but even at that, like, they need to be competing at a higher level for that to matter. At lower levels, like for Gen Pop, for normal people who just want to be fitter, healthier, and stronger, the primary consideration is this place needs to be somewhere they want to go, somewhere they feel welcome, somewhere they feel comfortable, and somewhere they feel proud to be a part of. And if you don't have that, they're going to go somewhere else, or they're going to drop out entirely. And at that point, you've lost them. And they may have lost 6 months, 12 months, 3 years of progress, or even just maintenance. So, yeah, when it comes to how you communicate with clients and how you talk to them, I think it's so important. And it's why we'll only ever focus on 1 or 2 things in a training session. And the general rule is, like, if it looks shit but it's safe, let's not worry too much about it. If it's dangerous, yeah, let's make some changes. But if it's dangerous, we've probably failed somewhere on the way up to it. If somebody can't barbell squat and they're doing it in such a manner that, you know, they're looking at the floor and the bar smacking them in the back of the head, they're probably not squatting efficiently with any weight, not just a bar. Like, even with a goblet squat, they're probably going to be struggling. And if you haven't recognized that on the way up and corrected it or built the necessary strength, they probably shouldn't be in a position where, like, they're liable to fail on something. And if that's happened, that's on you as a coach for not recognizing it. Same idea with deadlifts. Like, if somebody is, you know, round backing it off the floor, and we can get into the whole, is round back deadlift dangerous or not stuff later. But if somebody is deadlifting in a suboptimal position, let's just call it, they're probably there because you've done something wrong on the way up. Maybe you should have been doing stiff leg deadlifts. Maybe you should have been doing rack pulls or top down deadlifts or something else. But again, it's back on you as a coach. It's not their fault as a client. So don't chastise them. Don't criticize them. Don't make them feel bad because you've done something wrong. There was some other point I was going to make. Can't remember what it is. I'll come back to it
For sure.
if that's all right.
The one thing I do really like, that what you were kind of touching off there, is I think if you do, let's just say you're one of those trainers, and inadvertently, again, as you said, I do think most trainers are well-intentioned, but ultimately I think most trainers can have a net negative effect on people's perception of fitness. And I think it's because they're focusing on what they think is the preferred outcome versus what that person can reasonably achieve within the confines of the situation they're in. And that's the important thing. My stance in the way I would approach, and I imagine you're exactly the same, is I want to look tangibly at what positive impact I can have on this person now in the circumstance they're in. Let's say they move country, right? And they're gone and they're not my client anymore. That's okay. But I want them to say, I loved training back home with Ian or James or whoever. I want to continue this trend now. So even if, sure, I'm not making any more money from them, but I have improved the perception of the fitness industry for one person that they now know what they actually want. And should their sets of circumstances change, maybe they're not working 80-hour weeks anymore. Maybe they don't have 3 small kids at home. Maybe they now have more time. Maybe like, I actually really like this fitness thing. I'm going to double down on those efforts from that groundwork I laid. And I think that's like the best position you can have with people in those formative few weeks or months or even years. As I know you have an excellent retention rate at RevFit. So if those people do find them, like I'm sure now, if you've had a member who's been there 6 years ago, goes, you know what, James, I want to give that powerlifting thing a go. Yeah. What do I do next? You know, you will have built up such a stockpile of trust, and they will have seen results based on what they can do in the time they have, and they enjoy coming to that gym, that you're going to be the first person they ask. You know, so I think that's it really stands to what we can do as fitness professionals versus what we tend to project onto people.
Yeah, and look, that's kind of the entire structure of how the business operates. Like everything starts at a consultation call, obviously, where we try to find out about the person and get to know them. And one of the key questions we always ask is like we always focus on the first 6 weeks, not because you're going to change your body and change your life in 6 weeks, but because it's long enough to see some initial progress, long enough to see some initial change. You start to benefit or experience the benefits of training, your energy will improve, and you'll just feel better overall. So tell me, let's fast forward 6 weeks. You know, we're late October now, let's say the middle of December. What has to happen between now and then for you to be happy? What would good results or good outcome actually look like? And that will stump most people because they've never really thought about it. You're putting them on the spot and telling them to name something. And a very, very, very high percentage of the time, they don't say weight, they don't say strength. They say, I just want to show up consistently. So if I'm still coming in 6 weeks, that is a success, because they know intuitively things don't change fast. They know it's like you don't give up fitness after 6 weeks. You need to keep it going. So the goal then becomes like, well, let's just aim for a certain number of sessions. Let's say, like, depending on their schedule, like, can they make 2, 3, or 4 times a week realistically and consistently? Most people will say 3. In that case, your only goal for the first 6 weeks is make 18 sessions. If at that point you can squeeze a few more in, great, but make 18 now over 6 weeks, and that's probably 18 more than the previous 6 months.
Yes.
And at that point, you're going to be stronger, you're going to be fitter, and everything's going to be easier. And once you do make training consistently, you're probably also going to look after your food better because there's a reason to do it now. Like when you're not training, you know what, who cares if you have some extra chocolate? There's no downside to it. The negative feedback loop is also longer because if you're eating crap, you're probably not going to see the weight gain for multiple months. So if you're eating, like, you probably won't see the negative feedback of eating junk before a training session either, but there's just another reason not to do it. And over time becomes more reasons not to do it than there is to do it. And then in training itself, we're like, you're coming in, you've never trained before. Our goal is to break you in without breaking you. Let's do some dumbbell, kettlebell, and bodyweight strength work. Let's get you moving well. Let's get your fitness up. Let's teach you how to lift weights without really teaching you how to lift weights, because like the technique coaching happens in the first couple of months of doing dumbbell and kettlebell work. So that when you put a barbell on someone's back, they're like, oh, so it's just like a goblet squat. Yes, it's a squat. Then over time, like, we'll do check-ins along the way. We'll do goal reviews every 12 weeks. And along the way, we'll talk about moving to strength and going to the next logical progression of training. And at that point, the person's probably settled in long enough. They're comfortable in the environment. They know us. They trust us. They feel stronger in themselves, and they feel more confident they can actually take on these new challenges. So they end up under a barbell. And then, like, it just goes. Like, people who've never lifted before, like, I can't believe I just deadlifted 100 kilos. I'm like, yeah, it's because you've done all the work. Like, you've earned this. So if I told them at the very start, your very first session, we're going to learn how to deadlift, and you're going to deadlift 100 kilos, they'd be gone. They'd shit the bed. Quite rightly so as well, because it's just so far away from where they're comfortable. So all we're really looking to do is just continually expand comfort zones. And it's the same with nutrition. Like, if somebody's lunch is a chicken fillet roll with cheese and curry sauce, the first step isn't like fresh, in-season, locally produced fruit and veg. The first step is, let's have a plain chicken roll, like actual chicken, with some tomato and lettuce. And that is a good improvement from where you were 2 weeks ago. And then, maybe you start to prep meals, maybe you don't. Maybe you just go and buy Dublin Meat Company's Fit Food meals, and that becomes your lunch or that becomes your dinner. Like, that is so far beyond where you started that
Mm-hmm.
How is this a bad thing? Like, yeah, look, we're not perfect. We're not telling them the exact optimal thing to do, but it's optimal for them because it's what they can actually do. It doesn't matter if we're the best gym in the world or the best programming in the world. If they can't do it, if they can't follow it, if they can't make it to us, or if we drive them away because they don't like us, we're not going to help them. And ultimately, we're just trying to help.
Actually, incidentally, I have a hot take on like food prep.
Let's
Now,
go.
I do food prep. Like, obviously, I make a lot of my own food, but I think in the fitness world, we have overstated for the average busy person the value in prepping every single meal, because you are now, again, you have to look at what people have and where their priorities lie. So with all things, there's three main qualities, let's just say, and you can only ever have two at the same time. So you have quality, you can have speed, so how fast you can have it, and you can have affordability. For people that are extremely busy, right? So let's say the people that like are very busy but want to take their fitness seriously, so they need like a class at a time that suits them. They're probably willing to have the quality and the speed of delivery and pay the extra. The affordability becomes less important, and the same exact thing happens with food. Rather than me telling like parents of a new child that they need to, by the way, you need to set an hour aside every 2 days to like batch cook rice and potatoes, because everybody has the same 24 hours in a day, James.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I can say, well, here are some good strategic options that are nice and quick and good quality and align with what you've told me your outcome goals are. And yeah, the sacrifice there is probably going to cost a little more. And like, if that's not the option for somebody, then we can talk other ways around that. But more often than not, I think it's like, it's again, this kind of like tone deaf thing a lot of trainers can do. It's like you mentioned, they're getting interrogated when they come into the gym about why'd you do this, and this. Like, I have clients that like apologize to me still. There's one lady in particular who will apologize. Like, she had a grandkid recently. She's like, oh, we were kind of had the bottles of wine out, and we're having a few, like, I was having the crisps and the Pringles, and I was like, you had a grandkid. Like, that's amazing. Like, why are you apologizing to me for being a person? And I think it's like really indicative of, in some cases, maybe the militant mindset people think they have to be involved in training and fitness at any level. But I think it's also maybe not necessarily you and me at this moment in time, but I think in general, any trainers listening to this maybe need to look at like, what message do I put out to people, and what do I want people to think versus what am I actually putting out? Because I think when we look at how much anticipatory anxiety people have about the gym or dieting or training, or even like you said, putting a bar on their shoulders, or how we get them to approach their first 100-kilo deadlift. And even at that, is that even something they want, or is it something we've decided they want? Like, that's something you need. I really like the idea that you sit down every 12 weeks and reorientate this person and say, where are we going? Are you happy with the trajectory? Like, have the goalposts moved?
Yeah.
Because that's okay, but let's make sure we know. Because I'm a huge advocate for that. Like, it's communication on both sides is the only way for it to progress long term. Like, I've mentioned on this podcast a few times, and I like to always bring it up. There's a coach in America called Eric Cressy, and he has a quote that I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's essentially, if you put 30 kilos in somebody's deadlift, that's great. But if you were a dickhead, the only thing they're going to say is that guy was a prick. Whereas somebody could see no real tangible change with you, but they loved every session. They'll always say he was a fucking great guy. And I think that is probably the better outcome, because now that person will always have good memories of being in your gym and training in general. And I think that's probably the best thing we can possibly do. I don't want to keep you here a whole pile longer, but I do have a couple more questions for you. You recently came back into powerlifting.
Right, okay.
Because like, I'll be honest, right? Because, so I do the commentary for the series, mostly for the Pro-Am or Dave Wonder, wherever I can, whenever my own lifters aren't out there. And I was really pleasantly surprised to see your name on the list.
Okay.
Because as far as I knew, you were completely out of powerlifting. So what was the turnaround? What changed to say, it's time for the comeback?
So I'm happy enough to keep chatting. So whenever you want to tell me to shut up, you can. Just kick me out the door. The comeback to powerlifting. So it wasn't really planned. I had no intention. Like, I was getting ready for Masters. I got 3 more years to go still. I was like, my comeback is going to be the Masters. That's when I'll get on the platform again. And then whatever happened, I had a really good couple of months. Like, life had settled down. There wasn't too much outside distraction. Work was going well. The kids were happy. Kind of all the stuff that would normally occupy a lot of my headspace just kind of receded. So, instead of stopping to smell the roses, I was like, why not introduce some more chaos into my life again and do a powerlifting comp? So I think one day I had come to the end of like just some training cycle. It was probably like the TSA intermediate cycle or something like that. I was like, that went really well. I was like, I wonder when the next competition is. I'll put a post up on Instagram. I'll see about who's doing a bit of coaching at the moment. I'll just outsource it. I'll get them to tell me what to do. And that's how I ended up linking up with Adam from Union
Adam
Strength.
Joy,
yeah. And just bizarrely, we'd run a seminar in the gym on a Saturday for coaches. And I think I posted the message on the Sunday. And somebody recommended Adam. 2 people recommended Adam almost immediately off the bat. I was like, he was just here. Okay, cool. Let's do him. And it was one of those ones where I just needed to keep making decisions, keep the ball moving forwards. And linked up with him, told him kind of what I wanted, told him my constraints. He's been great to work with because he understands this isn't a priority for me. And I'm probably not allowed to say that. But it's not. I enjoy powerlifting. I like training, but there's always going to be so many things ahead of it for me. And it'll probably be that way for the rest of my life. It's not like it was 10 years ago. So I was like, here's what I want to do. Here's what I can reasonably devote to it. I was like 10 minutes an hour, 3 times a week for about 60 minutes at a time. And what can we do in that? And we just kind of started increasing things a bit as we went, targeted that comp in April, ended up just having a terrible day. Everything about it, my performance was atrocious.
Well, tell me about the day. I want to know about what it was like.
So on my Instagram stories, it's still there if anyone wants to go back and watch the highlights. I summed it up as saying it was a terrible day competing, but it was an absolutely wonderful day at a powerlifting competition. So what was it like being back there? It didn't feel that much different. Towards the end of my tenure within the RHPF, the competitions were louder.
Mm-hmm.
There was more music. There was kind of a lot more atmosphere. I had refereed at a few of the early abs events and gotten lighter fluid spat all over me. Back when the fire performer used to be on top of you and Gino would be there as well, dodging the flames. So I was comfortable in that atmosphere to the point where I knew that I should bring earplugs with me to the competition just to drown out some of the noise. So being back there, I was like, this is kind of like just being home again. The warm-up room, same as always, it's just a load of lads who like lifting weights, having the chats and doing some things in between. And timings and stuff just weren't great. Missed time some of my warm-ups. The flight to start time got moved around a couple of times. Ended up having to do my last warm-ups on the platform. Technically, the execution probably wasn't as good as it could have been. Missed 2 squats. I still think I should have got the second one, but that's a different story. And then, played it a bit safer on my bench press because I wanted to just see what I could do there. And then deadlift, I was like, you know what? End of the day, let's just see where this levels out so I can start to project the next training cycle. The day itself was just brilliant. I had so much fun. It was such a great time. It was so nice being around people. And then just seeing familiar faces like the likes of Lou and Tara being referees. Emma, who was only just getting started when I was finishing. It was great to see her kind of filling that role now as well. Even just the likes of Dav still being there.
Yeah.
So a lot of old faces I would know a long time. So it's a very comfortable environment to just kind of slot back into. And all the lads and gals involved in there, they're just sound as well. There's not a lot of dickheads in powerlifting anymore. So it was just a very easy, fun day. And I'd love to do more of them. But the timing becomes the thing. So I'll definitely end up refereeing at some abs events or USAPL events, I'm sure. Because they're projected to only be half-day engagements now. Yeah. Because there'll be sufficient planning and volunteer work on hand. So I'm really excited to get a bit more involved again, while also recognizing that it won't be a major part of my life.
For sure. It's this nice little fun hobby, the way it probably should be. I think one of the strengths of powerlifting is probably that it's a fairly low maintenance sport. So you can be a participant in it without having to dedicate, 20 plus hours of your life to it every week.
Yeah.
You can do 3-4 hours of it a every couple of months, be at a competition or volunteer or something like that, and you're still an active member of the community. Do you was your name not down for this November meet?
It was on the wait list.
Aha, yeah. Okay. So do you have an event in future that you're thinking of taking part in?
We are currently running towards a mini test ahead of a holiday I have in December. So I will call it a workup day at that point. And again, that depends on how the next few weeks of training goes. There's no point writing off 8 weeks of training to peak and recover if I could roll through for whatever reason.
For sure.
So all going to plan. And look, my training number is now for the last, the week just gone, it's probably the strongest at volume I've been in 5-6 years.
Excellent.
So I already know things are moving forwards there. May or may not test the first week of December. We had originally been targeting that kind of mid-November date anyway, and then I missed the sign up because I didn't realize just how quickly it was coming around.
It's crazy how quick the tickets go.
It's wild. It's great to see, and also just is a great indicator of how much appetite there is for more competition. So that's coming, and then look, after that, who knows what next year brings. Like, we have a new gym spinning up hopefully around January of next year. That is going to take up a phenomenal amount of time again. And there may be other twists and challenges to come along the way that kind of exclude me, or things might be really easy and I might decide why not. So.
Yeah, for sure. I love the idea. And you're obviously loving training again then with this particular style.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever experienced this or not, but I don't particularly enjoy training anymore.
Right.
It's an obligation now at this stage. My self-identity and kind of who I am is so wrapped up in like being the big guy and being strong. And like, that's relative, obviously. I'm not that big or strong. But I've spent the last almost 20 years training now. So it is just something that I do.
Yeah.
It's something I feel obligated to do and something like I have to do because it's part of who I am. And because I also own a gym, I spend a lot of time in the gym. And because I'm in my own gym a lot, I always see things I need to do that aren't training. And it's very easy when you're sitting in the office doing work to just let it run on long enough that you don't get a full session in. Or that you get to start the session and you're like, oh, damn it, there's a cobweb, let's get that. So I don't really enjoy the training that much, if I'm being honest, because I feel pressured to do it. It's self-pressure, obviously. But every now and again, I'll get into a good phase where life is calm, where general life stress is low. And I'm like, yeah, I do like this.
Yeah. I do understand that quite a
and
bit.
look, it's discipline versus kind of habit. It's like, sorry, this is the idea of discipline coming in, because the discipline isn't just doing it because it needs to get done and knowing that at some point you'll probably be glad you did it.
Yes.
Versus just making excuses and being a small child about it.
It's probably the purest form of delayed gratification.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's and like that, it's sometimes things are worth doing just because they're a good thing to do, even if in the moment you're not thrilled to do it.
Yep.
Like, don't get me wrong, it's not torture. It's voluntarily lifting heavy circles on a metal stick.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, totally. Like I've had those days where like I had it yesterday. I was here on Dan's podcast and I was just sitting on the bench looking in the mirror and I was like, fuck my life. I would rather do anything else than this right now. Like, I mean, I did as much as I could and then I fucking left.
Yeah.
But like, the irony is I woke up today and I'm like actually looking forward to training there. I'm going to Limerick for the Open. So I'm like, I'm going to train in Ian Benson's gym and have a good time with the lads. And I will say that I think the biggest thing that's kept me in it for this amount of time is having training partners. I know, do you get to do that often anymore?
No. And that is the hardest part. I've been able to train around people a bit more recently. Like, we don't really have an official coach training time, but most of the team will train somewhere around 2:00 on days like that.
Great.
So I'll usually try and cross over there. It doesn't always work because there could be other obligations. But I've also voluntarily chosen not to have training partners because it is low priority to me. The way in which my schedule can change last minute would make it unfair on somebody to expect me to show up and then for me not to be there. So like the isolation is kind of self-inflicted because I feel like it needs to be. And if I get a chance to link in with some people, brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, that's a cool way. I also like the idea of that. Like, I used to do that when I worked in Flyfoot. I would try to encourage the staff to train together. So like, I had like a crew.
Yeah.
That's how I like indoctrinated them all into powerlifting. And I was like, come down and do deadlifts with me.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, now most of them lift for me. So it's one of the cool things about it. But like, look into the future then. RevFit is flying.
Yeah.
You're opening a second location. When you say Luke is going to be part, I assume that's Luke Curran.
Yeah.
Do you know, piece of trivia for you, first ever Irish PF powerlifting meet I attended, I believe Luke was lifting in the 105 weight class against Mark Stell at the Leinster Open in February 2019. And they were neck and neck. They had the same total, but Luke weighed a tiny little bit more than Mark. So Mark won on, I think at the time it was whatever, IPF points or whatever they were using.
Probably would have been Wilkes back then.
Maybe Wilkes.
Yeah, I'm pretty was I coaching at that one? No, I wasn't. I think we just had kids. Yeah, Luke's numbers were fucking brilliant. Like, I think at one point he was squatting 260 maybe, or close to it, pulling like high twos and benching mid ones. Like, I think he totaled close on 700. And then, yeah, look, life happened to him as well. He's a couple of kids now. He's married. But Mark seems to have gone from strength to strength. I don't know if he's
Yeah,
doing much lifting still. I don't see much videos. But
So you know the kilo cast we have with the
Yes.
live streams. That's Mark. That's all
okay.
him. He does. He intermittently will he'll vanish and come back really skinny, and
Yeah.
then he'll get into a good phase of eating and blow everybody else out of the water. And then he'll have a couple of international comps and vanish again.
Yeah.
He's that type. Mark's super talented and creative, and it's whatever he decides to put his mind to, that's what he's phenomenal at.
Yep.
It's really infuriating, but he's so cool that it makes it difficult. When we did the USAPL Ireland panel podcast, Dan came down with all the kit to set it up, and Mark was taking down a lot of the podcast stuff.
Yeah.
So naturally, the two of them started nerding out about cameras and mics and things like that. It was really cool. But you've obviously seen the big announcement USAPL Ireland. As somebody who's been in it as long as you have, what do you think this means? If you could give us some even predictions for next year, what do you think it means for us?
I predict a better name for sure.
Yes.
USAPL IRL doesn't really work.
I like that. That's so dumb.
It kind of does roll off the tongue though. It just sounds like you're mumbling. What are the predictions? I think more competitions and better competitions. I don't know a lot of people involved in the RSPF still. People like Ali, etc. I've known Ali a long time. She'll be great as interim president and hopefully take on the role full time if she wants to. So I'm sure, and obviously with Chaos Band, we'll just call him Chaos Band, involved, the IPF will be fine. They'll continue to run really good competitions. They'll continue to be a great vehicle to international competition for lifters in Ireland. There's just being another option added in now. And probably for the first time ever, there's going to be a legitimate second drug-free federation that is run well. And sorry, I don't mean, it's obviously the AIPO as well that has some huge competitions, and Shane does some great work. But that's also a federation that was in existence already. It's unusual to see a new federation come in without another federation disappearing. So for the RSPF and the USAPL IRL to operate side by side, I think is really exciting. I think there's going to be some great crossover. I'm not sure what the RPF rules on competing across both are going to be like, or how that's going to affect things. But it's just going to be another option for the lifter. And I think for anyone with international aspirations and anyone who wants to lift on the big stage, they'll probably continue focusing on RSPF. And that's fine. And for people who want to just have the crack, who want to have a really well-run competition while also having a huge amount of fun, not worrying whether their wrist wraps are the right kind of wrist wraps or not, they'll probably go to the USAPL, IRL. And I think both federations are going to do really well. So, look, it's only good for powerlifting. You've got three great guys in Gar, Ian, and Jay running that federation. Three of the more prominent, most maybe, prominent figures in drug-free powerlifting in Ireland now, just setting up something that they're really passionate and excited about. So how can that not be a good thing?
For sure. And you know what? I am a staunch supporter of the idea that one does not come at the detriment to the other. And I think that's a big frankly, I think the people that are kind of dwelling on the potential controversy are probably people it doesn't affect. But even at that, to kind of give people some troubleshooting, you can actually go into the RSPF website right now. Connor and Adam discussed this on the Odyssey podcast. And if you go under eligibility, it's under the competition section, you can compete at any regional meet you want. So any open, if you want to compete at USAPL, IrishPF, AB Series, AIPO, whatever, it doesn't matter on a regional level. So on a regional level, so we're talking open meets, it's fine. You can compete wherever you want. It only becomes an issue if you're somebody in selection for nationals, internationals, things like that, which fair enough. And even at that, Article 14, which is the rule that everyone is citing that is causing a lot of the problems in the IPF, this rule is apparently enforced by WADA, not necessarily by the IPF. And the rumor is that SBD are actually putting pressure on the IPF to get rid of that because they don't want to have this limitation in where they can see world-class lifters compete. And I think that hopefully by 2025, 2026, we'll see some changes in the sport. But even locally, agree, by the way, USAPL Ireland, USAPL IRL probably does need to change. I'm actually a big supporter of just calling it Powerlifting Ireland in the same way we've got Weightlifting Ireland. I think that would be cool, an affiliate of the USAPL.
PI.
Yeah, PI, So, PI, whatever you might want to call it. But in any case, I think as well, there's two great advantages to this existing. One is it pushes the needle forward in how meets are presented. So getting meets in bigger venues, more professional venues is the next level up, right? And it doesn't come at the detriment of running meets in gyms. It's just now a next thing. And these guys are in a position where they can do it financially and it's going to do well. So great, let that exist. The vacuum now created in the Irish PF gives opportunities to newer people to come in. We've got the guys down in Phenom. We've got the guys in Odyssey Strength. We've got other figures that have been, like even Ben with Chaos, he's going to be hosting his first meet next year. Like, it's created a bigger opportunity for those guys. Because like Jay and Gar and Ian have been like mainstays on the scene for so long. And like, everybody has internal biases. Even if we try, and don't get me wrong, I think these three guys are extremely lifter focused. But I think it's going to make the Irish PF embrace some changes and some power restructuring that I think will result in better meets on their side as well, as an indirect benefit of having some of this support withdrawn. It might seem catastrophic now, and we might be like, oh, what's going to happen? But the reality is it's probably going to see a new federation born where people can lift, and a federation that previously existed actually level up even more.
Yeah. Look, life's going to go on. Like, for the longest time, and I'm not sure what it's been like the last 3 or 4 years, but basically, if Jay wasn't doing something, it didn't get done. And that was either Jay doing it or somebody abs crew doing it. And that was moving equipment across the country. It was setting up, the National Show Centre for Leinster Open. It was dragging stuff up north, whatever. And it was very easy to have it be that way for people because they knew it would get done. They knew they could show up for competition. Where now it's like, well, oh, you want to compete? That's great. You actually have to fucking do something. And like, maybe get off the internet, quit bitching about the toilets, go carry the rack in. Like, if you care about the sport, if you really want to have it grow, do something to help rather than just be critical. And I don't know, the internet's made it really easy. Like, the one thing I think the internet has done is remove the immediate fear of getting punched in the mouth. Like, you can say whatever you want online and you're probably not going to have any like retribution or comeback. Whereas if you were the level of dick you are online to people, to their face, like, there will probably more often than not be some very angry words and other things that may happen. So it just creates this situation where you can't. There's no backstop now. Like, somebody needs to do it. Somebody needs to step up. Like, you want a competition run, fucking go rent a van, go grab some gear, because the easy option is gone.
Yeah,
and that just makes everything stronger because you have more people stepping up. You have the load spread across more people, and hopefully that means a stronger federation.
And I like the quote for this because I think it suits. It's opportunity lies where responsibility is being abdicated. So there is now, because these people are gone, and if these jobs exist, you can be the person to step in, seize the opportunity, and put yourself in that position. And that could be massive because it's going to be fresh ideas, it's going to be new faces, and it's going to potentially present the sport in another way that we haven't even perceived yet. That could be phenomenal.
And that's the full circle coming right back to the start of the Irish PF. That's how it came about. It came about because there was this chance for a lot of people to step into a role that didn't exist previously and shape powerlifting in the country. And we've seen where that's come over the last almost 10 years now. So if you're not excited for that to happen again, there's probably something wrong with you. And it's probably because you care more about protecting your own little piece of the kingdom than you do about the sport and the lifters itself. And that's the biggest problem within probably organizational structures within all sports. You have people who are so entrenched, being a committee member, being a whatever, being a figure within the sport is more important to them than what the sport actually does in the lifters and people it produces. So to see the people involved running the Irish PF, to see the people involved running USAPL, IRL, all of that is really, really positive because the right people are there to actually grow it. They're not just trying to, it's not just a circle jerk.
Yeah. I think that's probably the most positive place we can leave this episode. Now, look, I'm only going to wrap it up here because I need to hit the road to get to Limerick, but I think that I'm really enjoying this. Would you be down for a part 2 down the road?
I don't know. Obviously, yeah, for sure.
Brilliant, man. Thank you very much.
No, thanks for having me. Pleasure.